Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to listen to our debate. Today, our team represents the belief that race should be a factor included when considering applicants for college admissions. To understand the significance of taking race into account in order to ensure equal opportunity for each student, we felt it important to share the history and reasoning behind the initial implementation of the policy in order to provide context and clarity. Affirmative action is a product of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which aimed to provide equal opportunity and access for all American citizens, but giving everyone the same set of rules does not automatically level an uneven playing field. And by 1979, the creation of policies such as racial and sex quotas that obligated schools and companies to consider women and racial minorities when accepting and hiring were becoming widespread practices throughout the United States. Even though the state has made improvements in the economic and social discrepancy between races since 1964, we still have a long way to go, and the need to put effort towards giving particular consideration to marginalized groups is still present and relevant. This need stems from the pre-existing disadvantages that still apply to racial minorities within America, especially within the public education system. Because funding for our schools comes predominantly from property taxes, the amount of resources available to each district varies based on the average income of the area. And because Black Americans earn 73% of what white Americans make, and because Hispanic Americans earn 69% of what white Americans make, more is spent on the education of a white child on average than is spent on Black or Hispanic childs. This system puts minority students at an inherent disadvantage without factoring in things like the likelihood of a white family being able to afford tutoring or other resources that might put their child ahead. Affirmative action is a chance after 12 years of education to compensate for that discrepancy. It gives minority students an opportunity equal to that of their white counterparts and helps to break down the perpetuation of white Americans living with an economic advantage. In an ideal world, there would be no need for affirmative action, but a neutral or colorblind admission system does not apply to a non-neutral and racially divisive country. If we don't take the step to promote equality at the stage of further education, at what point are we making an attempt to promote equality at all? It is our hope that through the course of this debate, we can make clear to you the importance of keeping the practice of affirmative action while combating the arguments against it. We believe that its continued use in American colleges and universities is crucial to building a country without the injustice and inequalities it operates with today, and instead legitimately providing the freedom and opportunity to each citizen that, even though it was not founded with, has always fought to find. Thank you.
Alright, so what is affirmative action? It is institutional efforts to increase the number of underrepresented minorities in workplaces and higher education. We think it's very important to consider that not every person has had equal opportunities to learn and grow in their lives. Instead of looking purely at grades, it's very important for colleges and universities to look at race and ethnicity because it's part of the applicant's story. In the article by the Washington Post, they asked high school seniors their take on if race or ethnicity should be a factor. What is interesting is that the kids who grew up in white, upper-class neighborhoods seem to feel that it was unfair for colleges to consider race as part of application. Students who were for race being accounted for were kids who grew up in minority or different race than their peers. Jennifer Hernandez, a 17-year-old Salvadorian American, wants colleges to take race and ethnicity into account. Her Hispanic identity is something that makes her who she is, she said. It adds to my personality and to my character. Sebastian Iberian, 17, son of Mexican immigrants, said race and ethnicity remain crucial in understanding the background of applicants, regardless of family income. He noted that he lives in McLean, an affluent suburb, and comes from a family with experience in higher education. On paper, he said, he might look nearly the same as many of his white neighbors who are not Hispanic. But the thing is, none of these people have lived around me. They never had to deal with, in 5th grade, one of my friends saying, "Oh, Mexicans are rapists and druggies." Iberian said, nor did those neighbors face assumptions about educational credentials of Hispanic students? Being different is a battle all on its own. It teaches kids resilience and strength. This doesn't mean that kids that are getting into schools are less qualified. According to IvyWise, a company helping kids get into Ivy League schools, it states, if a school feels that a minority group on campus is underrepresented, they may want to fill that need by affirming some students of a certain race or ethnicity that fall into the range of students who are already determined able to work and succeed in that school. High-performing students with impressive grades, test scores, extracurriculars, and great essays might be even more attractive if he or she comes from a unique background or ethnicity. An example of a situation like this is depicted in the story of a first-generation student from Ghana named Kawisi Enan. Along with many of his academic and personal accomplishments, his racial and ethnic background makes him even more interesting of an applicant to the admissions committees. Enan's test scores were in the top percentile of all students, as well for the African American students and boys. He was already an impressive applicant on paper, and his Ghanaian background, along with being first-generation American, sets him apart from other applicants who identified as Black or African American. Although this may seem unfair to most people, it helps so applicants have context and growth in the minds of the enrollers. As IvyWise company assured its users, I would like to assure all of you that race and affirmative action in admissions has long been a hot-button issue. Many do question its place today in society. The truth is, race is a factor that is considered when evaluating some applicants. But it's not the only factor. It's just a small piece of the puzzle. Dozens of other factors are also considered when making decisions, not just race, ethnicity, or background. Thank you.
Critics of affirmative action in highly competitive schools claim that it should be abolished because Black people as well as other minorities have had the same educational opportunities as white students in their elementary, secondary, and high school. However, K-12 school districts who base their admission on geographic boundaries are often put at a large disadvantage and do not receive the funding, quality teachers, textbooks, or school campuses that allow for equal academic success. In a study that tracked over 3,000 college students to assess the effect of affirmative action policies on grading, college satisfaction, and educational persistence among Black and Hispanic students in selective schools, researchers found that white students attending these schools often had greater access to private education before college, came from families who had an annual income of over $75,000, and had greater access to private tutors. Minority students are not on the same level playing field across the majority of college campuses, but white students still feel their educational opportunities are threatened. This study also showed that regardless of the belief that minority students will struggle because of pressure of a highly competitive school, those most likely to leave school were not students who struggled with grades, but were students with low levels of self-esteem and self-efficacy, and those who were more sensitive to the views of surrounding peers. This shows that affirmative action does sometimes place minority students at a disadvantage when they go to schools that allow them to be racially profiled by their peers. The argument of white student opportunities being taken away is also often risen, but researcher Mark Chesler notes that this narrow perspective on qualifications reflects an inherent assumption of white racial superiority. White is synonymous with qualified, competent, hardworking, and deserving, whereas the racial other is not. This stance is reflected in the assumption that if white candidates were turned down for admission, it was because somebody less qualified was given their place instead. We know from our own class experience on the topic of white opportunity loss versus minority gain that just because a minority finds success does not mean that white society is taking a net loss. Chesler also notes that not all students gain access to college campus based on the same criteria anyway. Affirmative action doesn't encourage the entrance of unqualified or less qualified students. It allows differently qualified students access. White students fail to see that if any inadequacies exist, they do as the result of historic white privilege and racial oppression more often than the failure of the minority student to succeed. We believe that race, to close, We believe that race should be a consideration in college admission on the basis that racial diversity on a college campus allows students' culture and identity to be seen and experienced by even more people. It gives minority students who experience childhoods uncommon to white students an opportunity to show their strength and their resilience. We believe that affirmative action does not take away from the success of white students. Rather, it allows differently qualified students to have the same academic opportunities, and it creates a much more rich environment for all students. Minority students are often disadvantaged before entrance into college, which may affect their test scores or overall GPA, but this doesn't mean they lack education or the ability to succeed. Researchers William Bowen and Derek Bach, for instance, find that blacks who attend selective institutions are more likely to graduate than their counterparts in less selective institutions. Likewise, a different study performed found that minority students thrive at selective institutions. If minority students with similar test scores to white students are facing disadvantages at a selective school, it's more likely to be from lack of self-esteem and pressure from peers than their actual inability to succeed in the classroom. It is the responsibility for white students to recognize that minority students are not taking away opportunities from successful white students, and they are not experiencing reverse racism. Minority students are getting the opportunity to an education that has been accessible to white students for many more years. White is not synonymous with qualified and deserving. Critics might say that affirmative action creates an issue for minority students who might make up a small percentage on their college campus and find themselves underrepresented. We believe that if minority students continue to receive this advantage, they will be opening more windows of opportunity to expand and further diversify college campuses across the nation. We can see on our campus the benefits of diversity and know that there is more to a student than their GPA or SAT score, and that every student can give something special to every college campus when given the opportunity.